Good afternoon, and welcome to this week's Expert Chat, where each week we invite an expert to chat with us about their area of expertise. You can watch it live here in Kefi Studios, catch it on Facebook Live, or watch it after the fact on our website, playkefi.com. This week, we have the absolute pleasure of welcoming Kelsey Smith, a registered dietitian at the Children's Multidisciplinary Feeding Program at the Marcus Autism Center, as she walks us through typical versus atypical eating. So please put your hands together and welcome Kelsey Smith.
All right. Thank you so much, Joey, for the introduction. And that was quite a mouthful, and he did a wonderful job. So thank you so much. So yes, the Children's Multidisciplinary Feeding Program is where I work. I work with a team of clinicians who help children learn how to eat well. So speaking really closely to this topic is how do we identify what is typical versus atypical eating in the pediatric population? So to get started, let's talk about what's actually typical for children. The truth is that most children and adults really enjoy eating. What you'll see on the screen is a very cute picture of my coworker's son eating a gigantic broccoli stalk. I mean, I think it just does her little dietitian heart so happy to see her son eating this large vegetable. This video won't play, but what you'll see in this video, what we would see in this video is a really happy baby. He's cooing, he's laughing, the caregiver is feeding him his bites, and he's having a great time. They're having a great time. So these are all examples of when typical eating goes well. You know, food plays a huge role in our culture. It gives us the nourishment that we need to be able to thrive. It also plays a huge social significance. Think about all the activities that children engage in on a daily basis. They eat lunch at school. They attend birthday parties. They participate in family meals and our holiday events. It plays a huge social role. So that's why whenever children are rejecting food, whether it's all food altogether or even just some food groups, it makes it really, really confusing for caregivers how to navigate this. There are some typical dietary fluctuations that are common. It's estimated that up to 40% of children have these typical dietary fluctuations. And if you've ever been a parent, you know that that approximation is probably actually more like 100%. You know, 100% of children have some kind of picky eating or other mealtime disruption. Things that we see would be, like I said, picky eating, some strong food preferences, some behavioral mealtime disruptions, whether it's like getting away from the table or not even wanting to come to the table to begin with. The fluctuating hunger. I hear caregivers say, wow, they're eating the entire pantry one day, and then the next day they don't want to eat at all. Or even reluctance to self-feed. They want the caregiver to actually feed them each bite of food. And typically these dietary fluctuations go away with time, or some gentle caregiver education, nutrition guidance, or even some modification to the food presentation. The thing with typical dietary fluctuations is that they are usually more mild in their intensity, and they are not chronic. They're only there for a short period of time, and then they go away. So when caregivers are navigating picky eating, there are some tools that you can use. One is the Ellen Satter Division of Responsibility in Feeding. So I really like this because it very clearly defines what the parent's role is in feeding the child and what the child's role actually is in participating in mealtime. So for instance, the parent is responsible for what food is offered, where it's offered, and what time it's offered. And then the child is responsible for determining if they actually eat that food and how much they're going to eat. So again, some examples of this is parents providing regular meal and snack times, preparing the appropriate foods, being mindful that if you're introducing a new food to a child, it's not a great idea to introduce 4 new foods at once, maybe have some typically preferred foods with some non-preferred foods that they're trying to help the child learn how to eat. Those are all examples. And then, of course, it's the child's job to determine if they're going to eat and how much they need of those foods to be able to grow well. So when some of that general guidance doesn't go so well, what some caregivers may see is that their pediatrician refer them to a speech-language pathologist or an SLP. So speech-language pathologists, they're able to help with new food introduction, maybe helping with any chewing, swallowing difficulties, or even some oral motor hypersensitivities that some children experience that may, over time create a negative experience with eating. So this is one way to kind of triage how to help children with feeding difficulties. So that's more on the mild spectrum of the feeding difficulties. What happens when things become a little less typical? They become a little bit more severe, and they're lasting for a really long time. We actually have language for how to describe these behaviors. This is called avoidant and restrictive food intake disorder. That's a mouthful. So we can just call it ARFID. So ARFID is actually it's a behavioral diagnosis, and it's found in the DSM manual, the Diagnostics and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders. It's what we call a little bit of a newer diagnosis in that it was new to the DSM-5. But if you ask clinicians, we've actually been seeing this for a very long time. This is just a newer way of classifying atypical feeding behaviors. So what this means is, I'll go ahead and read it to you. It's an eating or feeding disturbance manifested by persistent failure to meet appropriate nutritional or energy needs associated with one or more of the following: significant weight loss or growth faltering, significant nutritional deficiency, dependence on an enteral feeding or oral nutrition supplement, or marked interference with psychosocial functioning. There's a lot to unpack in there, so we're going to go ahead and do that. Like I said, feeding difficulties, they fall on a spectrum from mild to severe. ARFID really captures those children who are in that moderate to severe range. Like I said, there are 4 types or 4 criteria that are associated with ARFID. ARFID A1, the hallmarker of this would be significant weight loss or failure to achieve expected weight gain. And this is going to be severe. Examples of these would be, let's say you go to a well child visit. I'll go ahead and click there. Typically, the growth chart looks like this. The child is following a very, very nice trajectory in both weight and height. Unfortunately, what we see sometimes as children are not meeting their caloric needs is that their weight starts to fall off the growth chart. They become thinner and thinner and thinner. What you may also see is that children, while they may still be on the growth chart, they may not gain weight for 2 years. Children are supposed to gain weight at a steady rate all throughout their growth, and so when they stop gaining weight for a period of time, that's a sign that there's a problem. So the next category is going to be ARFID A2, and this is what we typically call like food selectivity. And the hallmarker of this is a significant nutritional deficiency. It might sound kind of crazy. This is, by the way, this is a severe category. Some of our clients come to us with rickets, so that's like the bowing of the legs due to low vitamin D. We've seen children diagnosed with scurvy, unfortunately. Even some cases of essential fatty acid deficiency from intake alone. So these are all very severe cases. When we look at the different food groups, so think about fruits, vegetables, proteins, dairy, and grains, each food group brings a little bit of their own nutrition value to the table, if you will. So for instance, dairy provides vitamin D, calcium, and protein. Vegetables will provide vitamin A, C, E, and fiber. The children that we see with ARFID A2, they may only be eating 1 or 2 food groups. So you can see if you delete multiple food groups from the diet, the risk for nutritional deficiency can be extremely severe and likely. So to drive home this a little bit, I wanted to show you a example of what an ideal plate looked like. I almost call this a typical plate, but I think that most caregivers out there would agree this is not always typical. But what you see on this plate is that there are fruits, vegetables, lean protein, whole grains, and a side of dairy. This is fantastic. Now, the children that we see actually have a plate sometimes that looks like this. So what you see there is there's some fried potatoes, some processed meats, a lot of different processed snacks, and a sugar-sweetened beverage with that juice right there. And then we'll analyze what this looks like. So for the typical plate, it has about 400 calories, low in saturated fat, really high in dietary fiber, and it has a ton of vitamins and minerals with it. Now let's look at that compared to the atypical plate. Wow, so the atypical plate has almost double the amount of calories. It has double the amount of, or 4 times actually the amount of saturated fat, less than half of the dietary fiber. And as far as all of those great micronutrients, you can forget about some of those, unfortunately. So as a child eats this kind of pattern over time, the risk for nutrition deficiency is pretty significant. So the third category of ARFID is actually dependence on an enteral or oral nutrition supplement, some kind of formula that is helping the child prevent nutrition deficiencies or grow appropriately. And there's actually 2 subtypes to this category. One would be dependence on a tube feeding, so a nasogastric tube or even a gastric tube that goes directly to the stomach to help that child thrive appropriately. The second category would be drinking something like Pediasure or some other kind of oral nutrition supplement so that child still meets their expected weight gain goals. And this is also severe. And to drive home what that might look like for some of our children, some of them come to us drinking just Pediasure and not putting any food in their mouth. So the very last category of ARFID is going to be ARFID A4, which is marked interference with psychosocial functioning. And what this is most of our families come to us with this because their feeding problem has really interfered with the way that the family conducts their daily life. But the child may not have such a severe diet that they have some overt nutrition deficiency, but it may be something a little bit more complex. To give you an example, we just had someone in clinic who the child had a really strong fear, for whatever reason, of fruits. The fear was so strong, in fact, that the child could not go to school and eat at the lunch table. The family could not go out to eat. So this was a really big problem. The child was actually doing okay nutritionally, but it was really interfering with the family's ability to do the things that they wanted to do. This is a little bit on the more moderate range. So the truth is that there could be a number of factors that contribute to why children develop feeding problems. What you'll see popping up on the screen is a whole host of medical problems that may contribute. So let's look at, reflux or food allergies, some digestive disorders, or some anatomical problems like cleft lip, cleft palate. And over time, we don't really know what causes all of these things. We know there's a lot of things that could contribute. These contributing factors help the child actually looks at food or at spoons the way that you and I would look at perhaps snakes or even heights. So it's evoking that same kind of almost fear-based response to food as we would have to other things. So traditionally, some of the medical solutions for this would be, we'll just put in a feeding tube, or we'll just give them a little bit of formula. Or perhaps, we'll just give them a multivitamin. And while those are all really good because it helps the child continue to grow and thrive appropriately, it doesn't actually address the problem. And of course, caregiver, we're talking a lot about the child and their behaviors. Well, the caregiver, this is obviously impacting them as well. To go through this a little bit, yes, whenever your child has meal times that look like this, no one is happy. what we see is that there is a ton of parental stress. Um, Caregivers are spending a lot of time trying to feed their child. It's impairing the relationship with the child. It often becomes very strained, and by the time they come to the clinic, it's very, very fractured. And of course, it disrupts just the daily living, the way that the family typically would live out their life. They spend all their time just trying to feed the child. So these are some quotes from caregivers in our program of what it feels like when they try to feed their child. My child is 100% tube dependent. We're lucky to get in a few bites a day. Or he'll gag and almost get sick just watching us eat something like spaghetti and meat sauce. If you ever saw those meltdowns, you wouldn't want to offer non-preferred either. I'm worried about his health. How can he stay alive eating just 2 foods and drinking water? I thought that he would eventually ask for foods on his own, but he only asked for the Pediasure, and he won't even drink out of a sippy cup. So as you can imagine, I mean, there really is just this innate drive that caregivers feel to be able to feed their child, and it's extremely stressful whenever there is some barrier to doing so. And of course, there are a lot of impacts of feeding difficulties that we see from the medical side. A lot more frequent medical visits, frequent hospitalization, and of course, increased cost of care. So the example that we were going to show, I'll describe it to you a little bit. This little boy is so cute. He's sitting in his high chair. He was 100% tube dependent. And what we would see if the video was playing, was that this mom would try to present a bite of food, and he would kick and cry and scream and push the spoon away, actually hit her a little bit. So if you can imagine, if you got that response, you probably would not want to continue to feed your child in that way multiple times a day. You'd say, all right, we're done with that. Another case that we see often is, again, those food selective kids. So for instance, this child only ate chicken nuggets, French fries, and then maybe a little bit of juice. So he was extremely selective. What you can actually see in this picture is whenever the caregiver tried to present some non-preferred foods, which would be just regular chicken breast and broccoli, he got up from the table, he became extremely aggressive and actually hit her. So it can be, very, very, it can be a very bad situation sometimes. But the good news is that there is hope. To address all of these concerns that caregivers have, it really takes a team approach to be able to do so. Feeding problems are multifaceted. There is the behavioral component, which includes the crying, the disruptions, getting up from the table, things like that. Oral motor concerns about can my child actually chew and swallow the food appropriately. There is concerns about the volume, the variety, all of the nutritional concerns of the diet. And of course, the medical reasons. Why is my child refusing food? Is there some unknown etiology that's making it painful or aversive for the child to eat? So we actually have licensed psychologists, oral motor therapists, dietitians, and a gastroenterologist all together in our program. We all come together to help children learn how to eat food so that they can grow and thrive appropriately. So if we were able to watch this video, the cute little boy who was 100% tube dependent, what you would see is that there is a movie going on in the background. The child is interacting really, really well with the caregiver. He's laughing. They're having a great time. She presents him with a bite of food. He takes it fully. He doesn't bat the spoon away, nothing like that. They're actually having a great, great time. In this video, you might be able to see it a little bit just from the picture here. He is eating with his dad. There are 4 different food groups on this divided plate. I believe that there's a pasta, a lean chicken, some applesauce, and a green vegetable. Remember, the green vegetable was what made him leave the table and hit his mom up before. In this video, he would actually rotate through all of the foods, take a bite, chew it appropriately, and he sat down there the entire time. So it's pretty amazing the transformation that some of these children go through. And we couldn't do it without our team. So like I said, we're the Children's Multidisciplinary Feeding Program. It is a huge center. We have almost 15,000 appointments every year. We have the multidisciplinary approach, as you can see here. And we actually have 2 locations, one at the Center for Advanced Pediatrics and one at the Marcus Autism Center. And it feels like we're actually expanding almost every day, which is wonderful because that means that children who have a difficult time eating are now gaining access to the care that they need to be able to grow and thrive appropriately. I can't say enough good things about what I do. It's really rewarding work. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and open the floor up to any questions that we may have, either live or, okay, we've already got a question.
Yeah, so this was incredibly informative, and this was definitely an issue that I didn't really know all that much about, having not had any kids. But I'm curious, so in cases where outside medical intervention isn't needed, where somebody doesn't need to go actually to the facility, what are just some minor ways that parents can help a child who has atypical eating patterns? Like maybe we'll only eat pasta with string cheese every dinner, will not touch a vegetable, just things kind of like that.
So that's a really good question. And I would think if a child's only having pasta with string cheese, I would say you still need to come because it can take a lot to overcome those barriers. But in the meantime, sometimes just starting a nutritionally complete drink like Pediasure, or even trying to get some kind of small multivitamin on board to keep that child well for the time being would be really great. What we talked about earlier, the Ellen Satter Division of Responsibility is a great place to start at least providing some kind of meal structure for the child. But if they're only eating a couple of foods, I would say go ahead and bring them on in.
Cool. All right, well, let's go ahead and give it up again one more time for Kelsey Smith. Thank you for all that incredible information.
Thank you so much.
I know that a lot of our members and guests and plenty of people we know have a lot of issues with feeding, so I know this is going to be extremely helpful. So thank you, whether you were here live in studio, watching on Facebook, or checking it out on playkefi.com afterward. Hopefully you got some great questions answered. So we're going to be taking the next few weeks off of doing expert chats for the holidays, but we will see you in 2020.
Thank you.